"Who touched that rifle?" The sharp voice echoed through the armory so suddenly that every conversation inside the building stopped at once. Metal tools froze in midair. A clipboard slipped from someone's hand and smacked against the concrete floor. Near the back wall, beside a long workbench covered in weapon parts and cleaning kits, Claire Donovan slowly looked up from the Barrett 50 resting in front of her. The fluorescent lights above cast pale reflections across the rifle's matte black surface while the low hum of air vents filled the silence that followed. 3 Navy trainees stood near the entrance, staring directly at her now. One of them, a broad-shouldered recruit named Tyler Reed, pointed toward the rifle with disbelief written across his face. "I knew it," he muttered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. She touched the commander's rifle. A few nervous laughs spread across the room. Claire remained seated. Calm. Motionless except for the small cloth moving steadily through her gloved hand as she continued wiping carbon residue from the weapon's bolt assembly. She wore plain Navy utilities without visible rank insignia, her blonde hair tied neatly into a regulation bun at the base of her neck. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention. That was usually how she preferred it. The trainees exchanged looks before stepping closer. Around them, sailors quietly watched while pretending not to. The armory at Naval Station Norfolk had always been loud in the mornings, filled with clattering equipment, casual trash talk, and exhausted personnel grabbing gear before drills. But now the atmosphere felt different. Focused. Tight. Tyler folded his arms across his chest. "You even authorized to handle that thing?" he asked. Claire carefully set the cloth down beside the rifle before answering. "It needed maintenance." Her voice was steady and controlled, carrying none of the defensiveness the trainees expected. Another recruit snorted. "Maintenance," he said. "That rifle costs more than your car." More laughter followed. Claire said nothing. She simply reached for a torque wrench and adjusted a mounting screw with slow precision. The movement caught the attention of an older chief standing near the ammunition lockers. His eyes narrowed slightly as he watched her hands. Every adjustment she made was exact. Efficient. Like muscle memory built over thousands of repetitions. Tyler noticed the chief watching and straightened up, suddenly eager to perform for an audience. "You know what's funny?" he said loudly. "People come into this armory acting like operators because they watched a few videos online." One trainee chuckled while another leaned against the rack of training rifles nearby. "Bet she doesn't even know the safety sequence," someone whispered. Claire finally looked up. Her blue eyes moved across the room once, calm and unreadable, before settling back on the Barrett. "You shouldn't force the charging handle," she said quietly. Tyler frowned. "What?" Claire nodded toward the rifle sling hanging from his shoulder. "You bent the latch plate." The trainee instinctively looked down at his weapon. Confusion crossed his face for half a second before irritation replaced it. "You trying to tell me how to handle a rifle?" Claire returned her attention to the Barrett without reacting. "No," she replied softly. "I'm telling you what you already did wrong." The room fell silent again. Somewhere outside the armory doors, a warning alarm briefly chirped across the base before cutting out. Nobody inside moved. The tension hanging in the air felt heavier now, sharper somehow, like the moment before a storm finally breaks. And standing unnoticed beside the workbench, Claire Donovan continued cleaning the rifle with the same quiet focus that had made grown men underestimate her for years. Tyler Reed hated the way Claire Donovan stayed calm. The silence coming from her side of the workbench irritated him more than if she had argued back. Around the armory, sailors slowly returned to their tasks, but the tension never fully disappeared. Conversation stayed quieter now, mixed with occasional glances toward the woman seated beside the Barrett rifle. Tyler adjusted the sling on his shoulder, still embarrassed by her comment about the damaged latch plate. He told himself it was luck. Nothing more. "You think she is some kind of expert?" one trainee whispered behind him. Another shrugged. Probably one of those civilians they bring in for inspections. Tyler scoffed loudly enough for Claire to hear. Civilians do not touch command rifles without permission. Claire continued working without looking up. Her hands moved with the same steady rhythm, removing the rifle's bolt assembly before inspecting the chamber under the overhead light. Every movement looked practiced. Exact. Like she had done it thousands of times before. Near the ammunition lockers, Chief Petty Officer Daniels kept watching from a distance. He had worked armories for almost 20 years, and experience had taught him to notice details others missed. The way Claire handled the Barrett was not casual familiarity. It was instinct. Even the angle of her wrist while checking the chamber looked military precise. Tyler stepped closer again, determined to regain control of the room. "You know," he said, forcing a grin, "there is a reason trainees are not allowed near specialized weapons until they actually earn it." A few people laughed quietly. Claire slid the bolt back into place with a soft metallic click. "That is true," she answered calmly. Tyler crossed his arms. "Then maybe you should follow the rule too." This time Claire finally stood. Not aggressively. Not rushed. She simply rose from the stool beside the workbench and faced him directly. At 5'8", she was slightly shorter than Tyler, but something about the way she carried herself made the difference feel meaningless. Her posture stayed relaxed while her eyes studied the room with quiet awareness. She noticed everything. The security camera above the entrance. The reflection in the supply cage window. The nervous trainee near the lockers shifting his weight every few seconds. The chief pretending not to listen. Most people would not have seen those details. Claire always did. "You should worry less about me," she said softly, "and more about your sling adjustment." Tyler frowned again. "What is wrong with it now?" Claire nodded toward his shoulder. "It is twisted near the rear mount." Tyler looked down automatically. The strap was twisted exactly where she said. One of the nearby sailors let out a short laugh before quickly covering it with a cough. Tyler's face reddened. "You keep acting like you know everything," he snapped. "But nobody here even knows who you are." Claire held his stare for a second before answering. "That usually makes life easier." The response confused him more than it should have. Most people in his position would have tried to prove themselves, especially after being challenged publicly. Claire did the opposite. She looked completely comfortable remaining invisible. That calmness unsettled him. Across the room, Chief Daniels finally stepped forward. "Enough," he said firmly. The trainees straightened immediately. Daniels walked toward the workbench, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. He glanced at the Barrett rifle, then at Claire. "Armory inspection starts in 20 minutes, he announced. "Everybody gets back to work." The trainees scattered reluctantly, though Tyler lingered near the doorway. Before leaving, he looked back one last time at Claire Donovan. She had already returned to cleaning the rifle, completely unfazed by everything that had happened. And somehow, that bothered him more than anything else. The armory inspection began exactly at 0800. Sailors moved quickly between equipment racks while inventory tablets beeped across the room. Chief Daniels walked station to station checking serial numbers with the sharp attention of someone who trusted paperwork less than instinct. Claire Donovan remained near the rear workbench beside the Barrett rifle, finishing the final stages of maintenance while the rest of the room worked around her. Most people avoided looking directly at her now, but they still watched when they thought she was not paying attention. Tyler Reed especially. He stood near the supply counter pretending to organize cleaning kits while whispering with two other trainees. "Something is off about her," one of them muttered quietly. Tyler nodded. "Yeah. Nobody acts that calm unless they are trying too hard." But even he did not sound convinced anymore. Claire secured the rifle's bolt assembly and checked the chamber one final time before carefully locking the case. Every motion remained smooth and controlled. Across the room, Chief Daniels noticed the way she positioned the rifle before sealing it. Barrel angle correct. Safety verified twice. Carry orientation exact. Small details most people ignored. Daniels had spent years around special operations personnel, and habits like those did not come from standard training. A young sailor approached Claire holding a clipboard. "Ma'am, I need your temporary access card for inspection records." Claire reached into her pocket and handed him the plain white card attached to a faded navy lanyard. No rank. No title. Just her name and temporary clearance barcode. The sailor glanced at it, confused. "That is it?" Tyler immediately stepped closer after hearing him. "Temporary clearance," he repeated with a grin. "So you are not even assigned here permanently?" Claire took the card back calmly. "No," Tyler laughed softly and looked around for support from the others. "That explains a lot." One trainee smirked. "Maybe she is just some contractor." Another sailor leaned closer. "Or somebody's assistant." Claire ignored them completely. Instead, she walked toward the equipment lockers near the far wall where several rifles waited for inspection. As she passed, her sleeve shifted slightly, revealing a thin pale scar running along the inside of her wrist before disappearing beneath the fabric again. Daniels noticed it immediately. Old scar tissue. Clean. Surgical almost. Not the kind most office personnel carried around. Claire stopped beside one of the training carbines and adjusted the sling attachment without being asked. The young sailor holding it blinked in surprise. Thanks." She gave a small nod. Rear mount was loose. The sailor checked it himself and realized she was right. Tyler saw the exchange from across the room and his frustration deepened. Every few minutes someone discovered Claire knew more than she should. Not enough to explain who she was. Just enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then the warning alarm from outside sounded again. Short. Sharp. This time several sailors looked up immediately. The overhead speakers crackled before falling silent again. Chief Daniels frowned. "Second systems test this morning," he muttered under his breath. Claire glanced toward the armory entrance for barely a second, but something in her expression changed. It was subtle. Almost impossible to notice unless someone was studying her carefully. The calm stayed there. But underneath it, her focus sharpened instantly. Tyler caught the look and shifted uneasily without understanding why. One of the trainees laughed nervously. "Base systems are falling apart today." Claire quietly picked up a torque driver from the bench beside her. "No," she said softly. "That was not a systems test." The room went still again. Before anyone could ask what she meant, the heavy armory doors suddenly opened and two security personnel entered carrying sealed equipment cases. Behind them walked a tall officer in dark Navy combat utilities with commander insignia clearly displayed on his chest. The moment Chief Daniels saw him, he straightened immediately. Several sailors snapped to attention. Tyler Reed swallowed hard as the officer's eyes slowly moved across the room before stopping directly on Claire Donovan. The armory seemed to shrink the moment the commander stepped inside. Conversations disappeared instantly. Even the metallic sounds from the inspection tables stopped as sailors straightened where they stood. Commander Ryan Hayes moved through the room with the quiet confidence of someone long accustomed to authority. His dark combat utilities carried no unnecessary decorations, only the gold insignia at his collar and the feint were marks of years spent in the field rather than behind a desk. The two security personnel behind him carried locked black equipment cases marked with restricted access warnings. Chief Daniels immediately stepped forward. "Commander Hayes, sir." Hayes gave a brief nod without taking his eyes off Claire Donovan. Tyler Reed noticed it right away. The commander had entered a room full of personnel, yet somehow his attention had gone directly to the quiet woman near the workbench. Claire remained perfectly calm. She set the torque driver down beside the barrett case and faced him with the same composed expression she had carried all morning. No nervousness. No surprise. Just steady eye contact. Commander Hayes stopped a few feet away from her. For one long second, neither of them spoke. The silence made several trainees visibly uncomfortable. Tyler shifted his weight uneasily. He had expected the commander to demand explanations or start questioning her immediately. Instead, Hayes studied the sealed rifle case beside her, then glanced briefly at the workbench. His eyes caught small details almost nobody else would notice. The cleaning cloth folded neatly beside the tools. The exact alignment of the bolt components. The inspection sheet already completed in perfect order. Finally, Hayes looked back at Claire. "You finished ahead of schedule," he said calmly. A few sailors exchanged confused glances. Claire answered in the same measured tone. "There were delays in the maintenance records." Hayes gave a slight nod. "I noticed." Tyler frowned deeply. The conversation sounded less like questioning and more like two people continuing something already understood between them. Chief Daniels noticed it too. He folded his arms quietly while watching the exchange unfold. One of the security officers stepped toward the workbench and placed a sealed tablet device beside the barrett case. Hayes activated the screen using his thumbprint before sliding it toward Claire. "Additional updates came in 30 minutes ago," he said. Claire scanned the screen briefly. Her eyes moved quickly across the information before she handed it back without reaction. "Understood." Tyler could not hold back anymore. "Sir," he interrupted carefully, with respect, "she has been handling restricted equipment all morning." Chief Daniels shot him a warning look, but it was too late. Hayes slowly turned toward Tyler Reed. The commander's expression remained calm, though something about his gaze made the entire room stiffen slightly. "And?" Tyler swallowed before continuing. "We were not informed she had authorization." Hayes studied him for a moment. "You were not required to be informed." The answer landed harder than Tyler expected. A few sailors immediately looked away. Claire said nothing. She simply secured the latches on the barrett case and stepped back from the workbench. Hayes glanced toward the overhead speakers as another brief warning tone echoed faintly through the building. This time several personnel reacted nervously. One of the younger sailors muttered, "What is happening today?" Hayes ignored the question. Instead, he looked directly at Claire again. "How long ago did you notice the pattern?" Claire answered immediately. "Second alarm cycle. Approximately 18 minutes before your arrival." The commander nodded once. "Same estimate we had upstairs." Tyler stared in confusion. None of this sounded normal anymore. Whatever was happening inside the armory clearly involved far more than routine inspections. Yet somehow the quiet woman everyone had dismissed since sunrise appeared to understand more about the situation than anyone else in the room. Then Hayes stepped aside slightly, revealing the insignia patch on one of the black equipment cases behind him. Several sailors noticed it at the same time. Naval Special Warfare Command. The atmosphere inside the armory changed instantly. The moment the Naval Special Warfare insignia became visible on the equipment case, the atmosphere inside the armory shifted completely. Conversations disappeared. Even the trainees who had been whispering all morning suddenly looked uncertain about where to stand. Tyler Reed felt his stomach tighten as he glanced between Commander Hayes and Claire Donovan. The quiet woman beside the workbench no longer looked like some temporary contractor. Now every detail about her seemed different. The calm posture. The precise movements. The complete lack of concern while everyone else grew nervous. Commander Hayes stepped toward the black equipment cases while one of the security officers unlocked the reinforced latches. Inside rested specialized communication gear and several sealed files marked restricted access. Hayes picked up one folder and scanned its contents briefly before looking back at Claire. "Operations wants confirmation before transfer," he said. Claire nodded once. Then they are already late. The commander almost smiled at the response. Almost. Tyler noticed it immediately. The look between them carried familiarity built over years, not a simple chain of command interaction. Chief Daniels quietly cleared his throat. "Sir, should we clear the armory?" Hayes glanced around the room. Several trainees instantly stiffened, expecting to be dismissed. Instead, the commander answered calmly. "No. They can stay." That answer somehow made the room feel even more tense. Tyler shifted uneasily beside the supply counter. Every instinct told him he had misjudged this situation badly, but pride kept him from backing away completely. He folded his arms again. "With respect, sir," he said carefully, "nobody here knows who she is." Silence followed. One of the younger sailors immediately looked down at the floor. Chief Daniels closed his eyes briefly as if already regretting what was about to happen. Commander Hayes slowly turned toward Tyler. "You spent all morning around Lieutenant Donovan," he said evenly. "And you still failed to answer that question yourself." Tyler blinked. "Lieutenant." The word landed like a weight across the room. Several sailors looked toward Claire instantly. Yet she showed no reaction at all. Hayes continued calmly. "You assumed temporary clearance meant low authority. You assumed quiet meant inexperienced. You assumed confidence had to be loud." Tyler opened his mouth but no words came out. Across the armory, Claire simply secured the final latch on the Barrett case before resting one hand lightly against the workbench. The overhead speakers crackled again. This time the warning tone lasted longer. One of the security officers touched his earpiece immediately. "Commander, drone simulation moved ahead 12 minutes. Hayes nodded once. "Understood." The officer looked toward Claire briefly before stepping back again. Tyler noticed that too. Everyone here seemed to defer to her without directly saying why. The realization made him increasingly uncomfortable. Hayes picked up the Barrett case personally and placed it onto the center inspection table. "Since everybody seems curious," he said calmly, "we are going to settle something before operations begins." Sailors quietly gathered closer around the work area. Nobody spoke. Hayes unlocked the rifle case and carefully opened it. The matte black Barrett rested inside with every component perfectly aligned after Claire's maintenance work. The commander looked toward one of the trainees. "Bring up the range simulation feed." A large monitor near the wall flickered to life moments later, displaying a live drone targeting course several miles off the coast. Wind speed data scrolled across the corner of the screen. Tyler stared at the display in confusion. "Sir. This is active qualification equipment." Hayes nodded slightly. "Correct." Claire finally spoke again, her voice calm as ever. "Crosswinds increased 3 knots since the last cycle." Several sailors looked at the monitor in surprise before realizing she was right. The updated data appeared seconds later confirming exactly what she had already noticed. Tyler felt his confidence slipping away piece by piece. Every minute inside the armory revealed another layer nobody had expected from the quiet woman they had mocked since sunrise. Then Commander Hayes looked directly at Claire Donovan and said the words that made the entire room go silent once again. "Lieutenant, they still think this morning was an inspection. I believe it is time you show them otherwise." For several seconds, nobody inside the armory moved. The monitor near the wall continued displaying wind calculations and offshore targeting data while the low electronic hum filled the silence. Tyler Reed stared at Claire Donovan as if seeing her for the first time. Lieutenant Donovan. The title kept repeating in his mind, refusing to fit the image he had built all morning. Claire stepped toward the center inspection table without any sign of pride or irritation. She moved with the same calm precision she had shown since sunrise. Commander Hayes unlocked the final restraint securing the Barrett rifle and stepped aside. "Simulation target will enter range in 90 seconds, one of the security officers announced. Claire gave a small nod. She opened the rifle case and lifted the Barrett with practiced ease, checking the chamber and optic alignment in one smooth sequence that happened so naturally it barely looked deliberate. Every sailor in the room watched closely now. Nobody laughed anymore. Tyler noticed the way Claire handled the rifle. There was no wasted movement. No hesitation. Even her breathing stayed steady while she adjusted the bipod against the inspection table. Chief Daniels quietly shook his head under his breath. He had seen competitive marksmen before. He had seen SEAL snipers during qualification exercises years earlier. What Claire displayed looked different. Cleaner somehow. Like years of repetition had stripped every unnecessary motion away. The overhead monitor shifted to live drone feed from the offshore simulation course. Small targets moved across rough ocean wind conditions several miles away while telemetry numbers updated continuously along the screen edges. One trainee whispered, "That range is over 1,600 yards. Another answered softly, "Nobody qualifies shots manually at that distance anymore." Claire rested behind the rifle and looked through the optic. The armory fell completely silent except for the faint clicks of equipment cooling nearby. Tyler swallowed as he watched her expression change slightly. Not emotional. Focused. The entire room seemed to disappear around her. Commander Hayes folded his arms beside the monitor. "Crosswind adjustment?" he asked calmly. Claire answered without looking away from the optic. 3.7 left drift. Elevation +1 click. One of the security officers immediately checked the telemetry screen. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Exact match," he muttered quietly. Several sailors exchanged stunned looks. Claire had estimated the corrections before the updated calculations even finished processing through the system. Tyler felt heat rising into his face again. Every comment he made earlier now sounded childish inside his own head. Claire adjusted the scope slightly. "Target movement pattern is inconsistent," she said calmly. "They changed the drone route this morning." Hayes nodded once. "Operations wanted to see if you noticed." Claire's response came instantly. "I noticed." The commander almost smiled again. The timer on the monitor dropped below 30 seconds. Somewhere outside the armory, another warning tone echoed faintly across the base, but nobody inside paid attention anymore. Every eye remained fixed on Claire Donovan. She inhaled slowly, then became perfectly still. Tyler realized she was not just holding the rifle steady. She was controlling every part of herself. Breathing. Posture. Timing. The digital target crossed the simulation marker on screen. Claire spoke quietly without lifting her eye from the optic. "Now." A soft electronic confirmation tone sounded from the monitor almost immediately. Green indicators flashed across the display. Target neutralized. Perfect center impact. Silence flooded the armory again. One trainee blinked at the monitor in disbelief. That was manual compensation," he whispered. Another sailor slowly lowered the range tablet from his hands. She adjusted faster than the system. Tyler stared at the screen, unable to say anything at all. Commander Hayes finally stepped forward beside Claire. "Lieutenant Donovan helped design the offshore calibration system 3 years ago," he said evenly. "The same system most of you trained on during qualification." Several sailors looked stunned. Chief Daniels exhaled quietly while shaking his head again. Claire calmly secured the Barrett's safety and stood from the table as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But the atmosphere inside the armory had completely changed now. Nobody saw her as temporary personnel anymore. Nobody saw her as invisible. And for the first time all morning, Tyler Reed understood exactly how badly he had underestimated the quiet woman standing in front of him. Nobody inside the armory spoke for several long seconds after the simulation ended. The monitor still displayed the perfect center impact while telemetry data continued scrolling quietly across the screen. Claire Donovan stepped back from the inspection table and removed her gloves with the same calm expression she had carried all morning. There was no pride in her face. No attempt to impress anyone. To her, the shot had simply been another task completed correctly. Tyler Reed could barely process what he had just witnessed. Earlier that morning he had mocked her in front of the entire armory. Now every person in the room was staring at Claire with a mixture of disbelief and respect. One of the younger sailors shook his head slowly. "She beat the automated correction system," he whispered. Another answered quietly, "No. She predicted it before the system updated." Commander Hayes looked around the room, reading the reactions carefully. Then he turned toward the monitor and tapped the screen once. The simulation feed disappeared, replaced by an archived operations file stamped classified. Several sailors straightened immediately when they saw the Naval Special Warfare seal appear again. Hayes glanced at Claire. "You never told them about Alaska." Claire calmly placed her gloves beside the rifle case. "It was not relevant." Tyler frowned. "Alaska." The commander opened the archived file. A satellite image filled the monitor showing a frozen mountain range covered in snow and ice. Wind speeds and distance markers lined the edges of the screen. Chief Daniels looked closer and quietly muttered, "No way." Hayes folded his arms. 3 winters ago, a joint rescue team lost communications during a blizzard near the Northern Range corridor. Visibility was almost zero. Drone support failed. Most teams could not even confirm target movement through the storm. The room stayed silent as the commander continued. Lieutenant Donovan identified the movement pattern manually from over 2,000 yards away using thermal distortion through snow interference. Several sailors stared at the screen in shock. One trainee quietly whispered, "That is impossible." Hayes answered without looking at him. "That is what operations said too." Tyler slowly looked toward Claire again. She remained completely still beside the inspection table, as though the conversation had nothing to do with her. The commander tapped the screen once more. A notation appeared beneath the archived image. Confirmed system design lead. The offshore calibration program you all trained under. Hayes said calmly. Lieutenant Donovan built the predictive correction model after that operation. Chief Daniels let out a quiet breath while shaking his head. "I knew I recognized the name." Hayes nodded slightly. "Most people inside Naval Special Warfare do." Tyler felt his face burn with embarrassment. Every sarcastic comment he made earlier now replayed in his head one after another. Women do not belong near sniper rifles. Bet she does not even know the safety sequence. The memory made him want to disappear into the floor. One of the trainees near the back finally spoke up carefully. "Sir, if she is operations level, why is she here in a regular armory?" For the first time all morning, Claire answered before Hayes could speak. "Because details matter," she said quietly. The room listened closely now. Claire rested one hand lightly against the closed barrett case. People ignore small mistakes when they think nobody important is watching. Loose sling mounts. Improper maintenance. Bad habits. Her eyes briefly moved toward Tyler before returning to the room. Bad habits become dangerous later. Nobody said a word. Commander Hayes looked around the armory again. "This morning was never only about equipment inspection," he said calmly. "It was about discipline under observation." Tyler lowered his eyes toward the concrete floor. He finally understood. Claire Donovan had walked into the armory dressed like ordinary temporary personnel because operations wanted to see how people behaved when they believed someone beneath them was watching. And most of them had failed that test before sunrise even ended. Hayes closed the classified file and looked toward Claire one final time. "Operations transfer leaves in 20 minutes. Claire nodded once. Calm as always. But now every sailor inside the armory watched her differently. Not because she demanded respect. Because she had earned it without ever asking for it at all. The armory remained unusually quiet after Commander Hayes closed the classified file. Nobody rushed back to work. Nobody returned to casual conversation. Sailors who had barely noticed Claire Donovan that morning now watched every movement she made with careful attention. Tyler Reed stood near the supply counter feeling smaller by the minute. The confidence he carried earlier had completely disappeared. Claire secured the Barrett rifle inside its case and calmly locked the latches while one of the security officers prepared transfer paperwork nearby. The overhead clock read 0847. Operations departure in 13 minutes. Hayes checked his watch once before looking toward the armory entrance. Final readiness verification, he said calmly. Chief Daniels frowned slightly. Another simulation? Hayes nodded. Live coordination exercise offshore. Several sailors exchanged nervous looks. Live exercises connected to naval special warfare rarely happened without warning. Claire picked up the black rifle case and moved toward the center equipment table again. The security officer beside the monitor activated a second display feed showing rough ocean conditions several miles off the Atlantic coastline. Gray waves rolled beneath heavy clouds while a small drone vessel moved across the water far below. Wind readings fluctuated rapidly along the edge of the screen. Storm front moved in early, one officer muttered. Hayes looked toward Claire. Operations wants confirmation before deployment authorization. Claire studied the monitor quietly for several seconds. Target route is unstable, she said. Crosswinds are pushing east faster than predicted. One of the analysts immediately checked the telemetry feed. She is right, he said quietly. Correction update just came through. Tyler stared at the screens in disbelief again. Claire kept noticing changes before the systems finished calculating them. Hayes opened the Barrett case once more. One final demonstration, he said. Several sailors instinctively gathered closer while maintaining complete silence. Claire assembled the rifle smoothly and positioned it on the stabilized mount connected to the offshore simulation feed. The monitor displayed a moving drone marker nearly 1,900 yards offshore. Rough conditions caused the signal to jump unpredictably across the screen. One trainee whispered under his breath, "Nobody hits stable confirmation manually in weather like that." Chief Daniels answered quietly without taking his eyes off Claire. "Watch carefully." Claire settled behind the rifle and adjusted the optics slightly. The room became completely still again. Tyler noticed something different this time. Earlier, everyone watched her out of curiosity. Now they watched with respect. Real respect. The kind earned through competence instead of rank alone. Claire tracked the unstable target for several long seconds. The offshore winds shifted again. Numbers changed rapidly across the telemetry feed. One of the analysts frowned. Signal drift increasing. Claire remained calm. "No," she answered softly. "The vessel is compensating for current pull." Hayes folded his arms quietly beside the monitor. "Agreed." Tyler stared in disbelief. The conversation sounded less like instruction and more like two specialists reviewing details nobody else fully understood. Claire adjusted the rifle one final time before becoming completely motionless. Even her breathing seemed to disappear. The moving drone marker crossed the unstable wave line offshore. Several sailors unconsciously held their breath. Then Claire spoke one quiet word. "Mark." The confirmation tone sounded instantly across the monitor. Green indicators flashed again. Offshore stabilization confirmed. Perfect alignment. One of the analysts slowly lowered his headset. "Direct correction match," he whispered. "No automated assist." The armory stayed silent for nearly 5 full seconds afterward. Then Chief Daniels quietly shook his head with a faint smile of disbelief. "I have worked 20 years in naval armories," he said softly, "and I have never seen anyone read conditions like that." Claire calmly secured the rifle's safety and stood again. No celebration. No reaction. Just quiet professionalism. Commander Hayes looked around the room one final time. This is why details matter, he said evenly. Tyler Reed lowered his eyes toward the floor again, finally understanding the full weight of that lesson. Earlier that morning he saw Claire Donovan as someone ordinary. Someone beneath notice. Now every person inside the armory understood they had spent hours standing beside one of the most respected operational specialists in naval special warfare without recognizing it even once. The storm clouds outside Naval Station Norfolk had darkened the morning sky by the time the final verification ended. Inside the armory, nobody moved for several long seconds after the offshore confirmation tone faded from the monitor. Sailors stood quietly around the inspection tables while the reality of the morning slowly settled over them. Claire Donovan secured the Barrett rifle inside its case for the last time and fastened the locks with calm precision. To her, the exercise was finished. Another task completed correctly. Commander Hayes checked the operations tablet once before handing it to one of the security officers. "Transfer team arrives in 6 minutes," he said. The officers nodded and began organizing the classified equipment cases near the entrance. Tyler Reed remained near the supply counter, staring silently at the concrete floor. Earlier that morning he had laughed at Claire in front of everyone. He questioned her authority, mocked her experience, and assumed she did not belong near specialized weapons. Now every memory of those comments felt heavier than before. Chief Daniels quietly approached him. "You learned something today, Reed?" Tyler swallowed hard before answering. "Yes, Chief." Daniels nodded once. "Good." Across the armory, several younger sailors had gathered near the monitor discussing the offshore exercise in low voices. One of them shook his head in disbelief. 1,900 yards with unstable wind correction, he whispered. Another answered quietly, and she calculated faster than the system. Claire heard the conversation but showed no reaction. She simply lifted the black rifle case from the table and prepared to leave with the transfer team. That calm professionalism somehow impressed the room more than the demonstration itself. She never acted superior. Never demanded attention. Everything about her seemed focused entirely on discipline and precision. Tyler finally forced himself to step away from the supply counter. Every instinct told him to stay silent and avoid further embarrassment, but another part of him understood he would regret that choice for a long time. He walked slowly across the armory until he stopped a few feet from Claire Donovan. Several sailors looked up immediately, sensing the tension. Tyler kept his eyes lowered for a moment before speaking. "Lieutenant Donovan," his voice sounded rougher than he expected. Claire turned toward him calmly. Tyler took a breath. "I was disrespectful this morning." The armory remained completely silent. "I judged you before I knew anything about you," he continued quietly. "I should not have done that." Claire studied him for a brief moment. No anger crossed her face. No satisfaction either. Just the same calm expression she had carried since sunrise. Finally, she answered softly. "Most mistakes start before people realize they are making them." Tyler nodded slowly. He understood exactly what she meant now. Commander Hayes watched the exchange from beside the entrance without interrupting. Claire adjusted her grip on the rifle case before speaking one final time. "Confidence matters in this job," she said quietly. "But discipline matters more." Tyler looked directly at her for the first time all morning. "Yes, ma'am." The words came naturally now. Respectfully. Not because of her rank alone, but because he finally understood who she was beneath the quiet uniform and temporary access badge. The overhead doors opened as the transfer team arrived outside the armory. Rain tapped softly against the concrete beyond the entrance while gray morning light spilled across the floor. Commander Hayes stepped forward. "Time to move." Claire gave a small nod and started toward the exit with the security personnel beside her. As she passed through the armory, sailors instinctively straightened. Some nodded respectfully. Others stepped aside silently to clear her path. Tyler watched her leave without saying another word. Just hours earlier, most people in that room barely noticed Claire Donovan at all. They saw an ordinary woman standing quietly beside a rifle case. By the end of the morning, they understood they had spent the entire day beside someone whose skill, discipline, and professionalism spoke louder than rank ever could. And long after the armory doors closed behind her, the lesson she left there stayed with every sailor who witnessed it.